Hey, good afternoon, folks. Welcome to another episode of Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. I'm sitting here, Matt's sitting in for Elizabeth because she couldn't be here, or she might be here late.
Stuck in traffic,
Or
apparently.
stuck in traffic. It's pretty bad out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should, tonight's show is on the Second Amendment, and I really think we need elevate that to the point where we really need tanks.
Really?
So you can get through the traffic.
That'd be awesome.
I think it's a constitutional necessity, really.
Yeah.
But anyway, today we are joined by a couple of friends of mine, Jen Coffey, Representative Coffey, who is how many terms have you served? I know it's at least 2.
This is my second term.
This is your second term?
Yep. I represent the towns of Andover, Boscawen, Canterbury, Loudon, Northfield, and Salisbury.
Okay.
Yeah, you need to. Yeah.
That better?
There you go. Yeah.
Okay, and Evan Knappen, who wrote the book on firearm laws,
The book.
literally.
Literally wrote the book. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I've used this guide in the legislature a number of times.
Really?
Yeah, well,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's easier to look them up, and he's got some nice explanations in them, so it makes it a little easier to understand an RSA if you get a little confused on one.
Can we see the cover of that? That looks like
Sure.
quite the cover there. This,
It is quite the cover.
you holding the gun?
Well, yeah, that's actually what the firearm that I'm holding is a Charleville musket marked from New Hampshire.
Oh, okay.
Actually fought in the Revolution.
Oh, no kidding.
Oh, yeah,
that's
it's
cool.
a documented piece that I
That's
was
cool.
fortunate enough to find. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a
Very
cool
nice.
piece. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Right, yeah, it's neat. The documentation, it's one of the only times they marked muskets was in New Hampshire because New Hampshire was able to get, in Portsmouth, a ship came in with 12,000 Charlevilles that Benjamin Franklin helped arrange through France to get
Yep,
here.
yep.
And we ended up having a fight with George Washington, who wanted to take all of them away from New Hampshire, but Langdon cut a deal. And we were able to keep 2,016 that they immediately got gunsmiths to mark New Hampshire and number. And the receipt for it, the receipt is in the archives, reimbursing General Poor for paying for the markings of the 2016 New Hampshire muskets.
So the marking was almost specifically to make sure that the Washington didn't.
That's right. It was to stop Washington from stealing our guns.
Interesting.
Nothing's
Oh, okay,
changed.
okay. Yeah,
Nothing's changed, right? Yeah. Yep.
And Jen, you got your own book.
I do.
You want to show everybody your awesome book?
Sure. It's called Knives, Lipstick, and Liberty, One Woman's Journey, and I documented the last 5 years of my life from being somebody who wasn't politically involved at all to working to change laws in New Hampshire to restore lost liberties.
Yes.
And the great thing about this, if I can just indulge for a moment, is that portion of the proceeds from this book are going to Camp Constitution to pay for children's scholarships to attend this yearly camp where kids learn about our history, they learn about the Bill of Rights, about our Declaration of Independence, and what's important about our history that they should all know.
Right.
That's excellent. Very cool. Good.
So there was a couple of things. Matt, can you read the phone number in case people can't see it? I can't see it.
Okay, yep, absolutely. 413-0223, and that's area code 603 if you're watching outside of Manchester or online.
Eyes are bad. I use 30-round clips just because I can't see well enough to use single shot.
Good a reason as any.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you, Evan, before I forget, because my co-host Elizabeth wanted to know. She's planning on going to Colorado. What are legally, because she's going, my understanding is if you leave a state that the firearms are legal and you are going to a state that the firearm is legal, as long as it's locked in the trunk, they really can't do anything about it, but I don't know.
Well, it's essentially that. It's under the federal law. There's federal preemption for interstate transport. I have it in my book, and it's Title 18, 926A. That's the federal law. And it essentially says as long as you're going from a place where you legally can possess and carry the firearm and going to another place where you legally can possess and carry a firearm, then you can transport cased, unloaded, essentially not readily accessible, that firearm. If you put it in your trunk, keep it away, keep it locked, not readily accessible, you can transport it through all the other states and bad jurisdictions like New Jersey, Washington, D.C., New York, Massachusetts,
Yep.
et cetera, and you have preemptive protection on the possession of that firearm.
Okay.
What do you
And
mean
that's
by
how to do.
what do you mean by bad jurisdictions? Can you define that?
Well, in my world, bad would be the places that take away and restrict our rights to keep and bear arms, to
Sure.
own, possess firearms, and they have many different laws whose only effect is on law-abiding citizens to turn them into criminals.
Okay.
Those jurisdictions that do
Okay.
that,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
One thing I wanted to get off my chest is I was telling my friends here before we started that always aggravates the heck out of me is politicians who, that you'll ask them, what do you think about the Second Amendment? And they'll say, oh, I went hunting once. or yes, I shot squirrels in my backyard. And I just want to inform people that initially the Second Amendment was not had two primary purposes. One was self-defense, which we all understand, that you should be able to, a free person should be able to defend oneself. But the second side of that coin was the idea that as long as the people had firearms, the government was not in control, i.e. the balance of power. It's like the right to free speech, the right of freedom of the press. Many of the things in the Bill of Rights are specifically, your right to the free press is specifically to be able to speak out against the government anytime you want. That's what it's for. It's intended to be a balance against the government, so the government can't squash your speech. And when we're out in front of the State House protesting something, you have to be able to do that for a free country, for the government to stay where it belongs. And it's the same thing with the right to bear arms. It's there so that the balance of power always stays in the hands of the people. Once the people do not have any firearms, the government is in complete control, and now you're its slave. And I was going to, Matt reads better than me. I was going to ask him to read the 10th Amendment to the New Hampshire Constitution.
Absolutely.
Oh, my girlfriend's here. My GF.
Oh, she is here. Okay. I can
You want to,
I can slide out.
You can
She
slide out?
She can jump in.
Let me
Yeah.
get a
Gary,
chair.
I'll sit on your lap.
Ooh, baby.
Wow. I don't know what to say
Gary,
to
I'll
that.
add to what your statement was. Our founders were very much aware of what tyrannical government can do. And if you look at the history of the world, the greatest tyrants in this world, Hitler, for example, what were the first things that they did was to disarm the people, to take away the ability to have firearms, to confiscate firearms. People can't defend themselves when they come marching back into their town. What are they going to do, throw rocks at them?
Yeah,
And that's the
spitballs.
first thing a lot of those dictators did, was to disarm people.
Right.
And we've seen one of the worst atrocities recently in what occurred in Katrina, when law-abiding citizens were literally attacked by military and police personnel and had their legally possessed, legally owned firearms confiscated from them. I mean, if you haven't seen it, go onto YouTube and look up the video from Katrina, and you will find one in particular that is burned into my memory of an elderly woman in an apartment, high and dry, perfectly fine, lots of foods, lots of supplies. She had a revolver. The law enforcement that entered her apartment then physically knocked this elderly woman into her wall, onto the floor of her apartment to take her revolver, and then left her.
Well, one of the unintended or consequences of Katrina was we did get a federal law prohibiting federal agencies from taking guns during times of emergency, and we also in New Hampshire have a law prohibiting it as well. So Katrina did open a lot of eyes. Now, take a state like New Jersey, there they have the opposite law. They have a law authorizing the police to close all the gun shops and take guns if there's an emergency. But the majority of other states did put protections in place because of that.
Yeah, it's like you go on the inverse of that, Jen's husband is sitting over there. His name,
Yes.
Billy, was talking about the garbage going on over in England, where the riots are so bad that they can't defend themselves, so stores are getting destroyed, people's livelihoods are being destroyed, and the number one things being sold on eBay in England right now is aluminum baseball bats.
Oh, my goodness. No, that's something.
This
that
is
concerns me.
Elizabeth, by the way. This is
Hi.
Hi, Elizabeth.
my hero.
One of the things that concerns me is, and it goes back to almost really when we were concerned about Y2K. And everybody was concerned about, how to protect ourselves when technology shuts down. And that really wasn't even the biggest concern for us.
Just once.
Just once.
Hi, you're on the show.
Yeah, hey, I want to tell you, this is a fantastic show. I'm a big believer of the Second Amendment.
What's your name?
I have a question for you.
Yes.
I don't know, just a few, I think it might have been 6 months ago, there was some kind of group that was formed, and they tried to say that the lead inside the bullets were hazardous to people's health, so they wanted to take them off the market. Do you feel that we're getting closer and closer for some kind of excuse to take our guns away, or anything to defend ourselves? Just like to give you an example, I think there's a travesty that happened to the Browns. Here that you get two older people, just because they didn't pay their taxes, they're doing jail, 65 years in jail, for just having some kind of explosive inside their house. It wasn't outside on somebody else's lawn or whatever. But these guys got 65 years. I mean, the guy could have had a tank in the house. He has every right to carry an arm no matter what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that they were thrown in jail unfairly for this? This is ridiculous. I think that the government is actually looking for any excuse to throw people in jail and actually to take our guns away. But the question to you is, do you think that they're getting closer and closer to taking our guns away? And what do you think about the Brown situation? Thank you.
Well, I'd say one thing about the, I don't know if he's off. One thing about the Brown situation is, and it's typical that the police in a situation like that will come up with whatever they can to throw the book at you, because they had it up to their eyeballs, I guess, with the Browns. I didn't follow the case that
I
closely.
followed the case pretty well, and I have to say, in defense of the government and the police enforcement in that case, the Browns became so belligerent and became so difficult that they became a threat at that point. They had to be responded to as a threat. So in terms of that particular case, I think law enforcement had to approach them as a potential threat.
I'm not so sure, but,
that's how I read that.
okay.
But I mean, I thank you for the call. There's some very good points and some good
I-
questions, and
But I do want to touch on the lead. Now,
I think that's a greater problem in people self-loading.
yeah, the lead bullets are effective because of their weight to size ratio, so they carry. But I'll let Evan Knapp probably has more information
Well, I
about
can
that.
tell you, yeah. A
Please,
lead
can you hold it?
bullet is very dangerous to the person who gets shot by one, especially if you
Really?
have good aim.
I haven't been hit. I haven't been hit by
I'm
one.
in favor of having the most dangerous bullets you can when dealing with bad guys. So I like lead in bullets. I think it's a good thing, and it serves its purpose well. Now, as far as lead being used as a political tool to try to disarm us, yes, that has been attempted. Regulation through EPA with lead,
Yeah,
regulation in terms of even the ability to have a shooting range because
Shooting
of lead.
ranges
Now,
are
some of it
getting
is
hit hard.
legitimate concern. You don't want to be breathing lead dust
Right.
and lead fumes and such. But the idea is that you can try to use that to disarm us and take away our ammunition if you can't take away our guns. So we've got to be very, very
But what's the
vigilant
percentage?
about lead in bullets.
But what's the percentage
as
of
a
lead
tool.
bullets versus all the other kinds
Most
of
of- most-
ammunition
Well,
out
most
there?
bullets do utilize lead.
But to
I'd
a
say the
degree
ma-
that is dangerous?
Oh, no. There's various bullets have coatings, which are called jackets, that can be made of other metals.
Right.
There are bullets that are manufactured, and we're actually talking about the bullet, meaning the head, the bullet head, that are made with nylon coatings, even different forms of the manufacturer that makes the lead stay together in the bullet and stay in one piece.
I can give
And
you
these
an-
are things. Yeah.
As far as medically, I can talk to that. I was working at a XRE in Littleton, Massachusetts, and made molds for the lead. They use huge lead counterweights. And the people who were smelting the lead, which is heating it up, melting it, and pouring it into molds, were, because they used to test them, ended up getting much less lead poisoning, much less, than the guys assembling the lead on the machines on the floor. Because what they were doing was grabbing the lead, putting it in the machine, and they'd reach over and drink their coffee or pick up a sandwich and eat it.
Makes sense.
So just that little bit of lead on their hands was actually worse
Well,
than...
that's why you should wash your
His-
hands after
Yeah.
going to the range, and you should take
So
normal precautions
but
like that.
to say that the lead just, is harmful is untrue. We're going to take a call from Steve.
Hi, Steve, you're on the air. Hi, Steve, you're still there?
Yeah, how you doing? I just wanted to respond to what you said about the Browns, and I'd like to hear your comment, but I'd like to follow up on something.
Please.
You mentioned about that you followed the Browns, and you said that they were belligerent and threatening. In what way? They're on their own property, okay? You have a right to do anything you want on your own property. How could they be belligerent on their own property?
You have a right within reason to do anything on your own.
Well, what did they do that was so threatening?
Well, again, first of all, they were breaking the law on the tax evasion. And when,
No, they weren't.
And when,
No, they weren't. That's if you want to get technical about that, right now you can go on the internet and look up the two ex-IRS agents that worked for the IRS, and they will tell you that there's no law that says we're supposed to pay tax. That
Steve?
came in 1913,
Steve?
and it was only for the tax that we had in 1913
but that digresses
was
the
for
point.
the war.
Yeah, Steve.
But
Steve, hold on
Steve.
just a second. That digresses the point. The point is that when the law enforcement, for whatever reason, approached him, and at that point their dialogue began to shut down, and at that point he began to become aggressive. That is when law enforcement of their variety of kinds began to see him.
Well, he wasn't,
as a
ma'am.
threat.
He wasn't being aggressive because first of all, what he said was.
Yeah, but Steve, I really don't want to sit here and talk about tax evasion.
Okay, all right, right.
and-
But anyways, nobody answered the question. Do you see anything in the future, or anything going on right now where somebody is working on something to take the Second Amendment rights away?
But that's-
Absolutely. Well, I was going to say, the United Nations is attempting that with the small arms.
Yeah, I haven't been
treaty.
I keep getting emails on that, and I
Yeah.
have not followed that, so if you want to
They've
enlighten
been
us...
pushing that agenda for a very long time.
Yeah.
They can't seem to manage to get the United States government to disarm the people, so maybe they can manage to pull it off through some kind of a treaty with the United States to backdoor it in. But more importantly, the previous caller had brought up this point, and I did want to address this. You got to watch thoroughly what goes on across our nation. I mean, California was looking at making taxation on bullets so extreme you wouldn't be able to afford the bullet. You might be able to afford the firearm,
But you
but
can't
nothing to
afford it.
shoot it with.
Yep.
There's been other efforts to put radio frequency identification or RFID chips
And
into
micro-stamping.
and micro-stamping
Another
into the
example.
firearms themselves or even into
On the
bullets.
gunpowder, they were actually
Right,
I-
taggants.
taggants in the gunpowder,
right.
so they could keep
There
track
have
of where it
been
was manufactured and everything
a lot of
else.
efforts across the nation to find ways to disarm the American public.
They're all
Well, I
like
have a
backdoor
question for
sneaky
you
stuff.
that a couple of people have approached me, and that is, will those of us who own small arm guns, will we be able to be grandfathered in under any new law that would
Not
try to take
necessarily,
away-
No,
which is
sir.
why you
We
want
would
to
be under
advocate.
threat as well.
No.
Yeah,
It's-
you
it's-
would, because they usually do it in steps. They say, don't worry, we're not going to take your guns, and then later on, they just take the guns. It's what if you watch what happened in England, that's how they did it. They,
And you're
piece by
right.
piece.
Normally, that's the smart play for them to get us, boiling the frog. But in two jurisdictions, I know for as well, New York and New Jersey, they didn't. They didn't allow a grandfathering. And in New Jersey, you had 1 year to turn in your gun, get rid of it, and after that, it was contraband. And there
Right.
was no. And these are guns that were lawfully purchased
Right.
with a permit.
Right.
Okay, and purchased from a dealer, they became contraband in a year.
Right.
So there was no grandfathering, and it's that way to this day. If you possess in New Jersey an M1 carbine or a Marlin Model 60-22 rifle, there is a 10-year state prison sentence with a minimum mandatory
cow.
5 years, no chance of parole.
Wow.
For
That
just
is-
for a gun you legally possessed.
That
Just a
is
second,
really
let's,
stiff.
you wanna-
It's
wanna-
crazy.
We
Yep.
got a call
We have
from
new-
Lauren.
We have a new caller. Hi, you're on the air.
Hi, you're on the air.
Hi, how are you tonight?
All right.
Good, how are you?
I have a couple of questions for Attorney Knappen and Representative Coffey. There was two bills of interest to me. The first one was the parking lot bill that got defeated in the House this year. Will that be reintroduced?
Parking lot, you mean the business?
The parking lot law where you were allowed to keep your firearm locked inside your car?
I was the prime sponsor of that. They killed that in criminal justice.
Okay, is that going to be planned to be reintroduced this year?
You can't, the House rules are that you cannot reintroduce the same bill. The only way around that would be to do it in the Senate, and the Senate's not as friendly as the House, so I think it would be a waste of my time to try.
Okay. and
It was,
my second
it was,
question
it was
is-
defeated on the premise that it was the property, the employer's liberty to say no. So which trumped your liberty to defend yourself, which I disagree with, but I believe that's the crux
I
of it.
disagree with it, and that really is the key. It's that there's an argument that pits your gun rights, which I view, and I hope you view as well, as a civil right, versus the property right of the property owner to bar firearms from their property. And in the same way that other civil rights should not be barred even from private property, I would put your right to have a firearm in that category. But libertarians disagree.
Yep,
And
so-
so you can take your position, but my priority is definitely to the gun.
Oh, yeah,
agree.
yeah.
Okay.
What was the second question?
Second question is concerning Senate Bill 88 that was vetoed by Governor Lynch. I guess the question is do you feel that will be overridden? One thing I do not like about the current bill right now is that it does not have the provision in there where if you are still you could still be criminally prosecuted, and that's not in the bill, and I'm curious why that never made it in.
Can you refresh my memory? We get a lot of numbers up there.
No, SB
that was-
88, I'm
that
very
was-
Oh, Jen's
SB
gonna
88
wing
is
this
likely
one.
to be overridden. I think that the votes are there in the House and the
What would
Senate
it-
to
can you-
override
can you
that veto.
inform
But
us what
I'm
it
not
is?
sure what he's referring to about criminal prosecution specifically.
What is Senate Bill 88
Senate Bill 88 actually ended up becoming a hodgepodge of a number of changes to our gun laws. In the sense of, well, for one thing, it got rid of the mandatory minimum, which is what got Ward Bird committed into jail, was that there was a minimum sentencing that the judge had to issue.
Yes.
That was repealed. It also allowed for brandishing.
But what it did,
And-
it
Oh,
had
okay, now I
stand your
remember.
ground.
Yeah,
Stand your ground
you
is
have the
part of
right
it,
to,
so
if
removing
you have the right to be there, you have
remove-
the right to defend yourself.
Right, removing the
Right.
duty to retreat.
Right.
And it also contained a definition, which we desperately needed, defining non-deadly force, so that individuals who display or produce a firearm, that is told to the jury to be non-deadly force, which lowers the thresholds that are necessary when you need to prove deadly force.
Right.
It was that combination of factors that cost Ward Bird. And our Supreme Court has ducked the issue since at any time it's been presented, even in the Ward Bird case, to say whether pointing, displaying, or producing a firearm is it deadly force or non-deadly force. And they just say, well, we leave it up to the jury to decide how they want to view that and never make a decision on it. So you get 12 people who aren't smart enough to avoid jury duty deciding whether it's deadly force or not. So we wanted to avoid that.
Hopefully, we can
Yeah.
make greater strides. I don't think that we got everything that we wanted, and I know I didn't. I know that many others who have been watching this stuff closely didn't, but I think that it at least was a step in the right direction, and hopefully we'll continue to move forward.
Then did you need to clarify something?
Did we answer your question?
Yes, you did. Okay, and thank you very much
Thank
for
you
taking
for
my call,
calling.
and keep fighting for the law-abiding gun owners.
Thank you, sir. Jen was sharing Jen and her husband Billy and I spent some time on a bus, and I got to know both of them. It was awesome. But Jen, I want Jen
Minus the
to...
almost going off a cliff portion, right?
No, we're not going to talk about the cliff portion. That was actually pretty funny. What I'd like you to tell people is how you got involved in this issue, because people who aren't up at the legislature don't realize what a pistol she is.
No pun intended.
Yeah, no, none at all. And it's just amazing. I guess there has been a change of your attitude over time. Can you explain that?
If you want to go back, my husband and I just celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary, and our son is 17. But years ago, when our son was just a baby, when we were just a new couple setting out, my husband had a long arm. I didn't have any firearms. I saw no purpose in it. And I really actually would get into arguments with him over having the firearm in the house after our son was born.
Right.
Yeah, what do we need this? We lived in at the time in Plymouth, Mass. I actually had what was called an RFID card back then, which was incidentally when we talked about the laws earlier.
Wait. You realize this is going over the air, and you're
Yes.
admitting that you used to live in Massachusetts.
Yes.
And you're okay.
There's a good reason why I moved my family to New Hampshire. But back then, I had one of these RFID cards, which actually covered for long rifles, but the only reason I had it was to carry mace, because my stepfather had insisted that I should carry mace. I saw no purpose on having guns. We would get into actual arguments over having this gun in the house, literally arguments. And I wanted it out of the house, and he kept telling me how important it was, and I kept thinking he was nuts, basically. And I would accuse him of such.
Wait. I don't think that necessarily is... Never mind. I don't want to...
Well, no, I'm telling you the truth. This is the truth. We had a nice... I know, it's scary. We had a nice little apartment. We lived on a main street. Make a long story short, there was a little bar across the street. We never had any problems with it. My husband and I worked opposite shifts. I worked days, he worked nights. And it was one night about 10 o'clock at night. I'm home with the baby. Baby's in the crib sleeping. He's at work. I hear two loud, obviously inebriated individuals right outside my front door. I look through the little peephole, and there are these two guys, and they're really drunk, and they're knocking each other around, and one of them even used my front door to alleviate himself. At this point, I'm grossed out. So I pick up the phone and I call the police, like any law-abiding citizen's supposed to do, right? This is what was drilled into my head. You call the police, they fix everything. I call the police show up, they tell the two guys to go away. Cops leave. As soon as the cop car is out of sight, the two guys are back. Now they're not just, now they're angry, exactly. Now they're actually banging on the door, they're actually yelling obscenities, they're going to kill whoever called the cops on them. I'm home alone with the baby. I am scared to death, and my first thought was to try and get out, but I realized all of my exits left to where they were. I was going to, can't carry the baby out. They're actually contemplating carrying the baby out the window, but I thought I'd make too much noise. That wouldn't work. Actually, that moment in time did something I never thought I'd ever do, and I certainly didn't think that it was something that would ever cross my mind. I got my husband's long rifle. I did know how to use it, I just wasn't fond of it.
Right.
I made sure it was loaded, I had it in my lap, and I called the police back. And the woman on the phone could hear them. And she keeps telling me, I hear them, the cops are on the way. And I'm saying to her, well, where are they? They were just here. How did they get, warp speed that far away? And it seemed
There's a
like
Dunkin' Donuts down the street, probably.
Stop it. It seemed like an eternity for them to come back. And the only thing that stood between those guys who
And
were
your
literally
child.
yelling and screaming and swearing that they were going to kill whoever called the cops on them, me and my child, was that long rifle. That was all I had. Now, the cops did eventually make it back. This time they actually took the two individuals away. In this instance, nobody got hurt. But how many times do you turn on the news and you hear about a home invasion, or you hear about a robbery or a rape that occurred that could have been maybe prevented if the person had been able to defend themselves? And
So
that's
was that
why
a turning point for you?
that was a huge turning point for me.
That gun is your now best friend,
We
right?
never not only was it never the source of an argument. I certainly apologized to my husband for being right,
And that's
and
like
then he
home
took
show
me out
points.
and absolutely taught me how to use it more proficiently. And we have a number of firearms that I'm very proficient with in my house. My life is no less valuable than a criminal. But when you go to a place like Massachusetts, the emphasis of law is on protecting the life of the criminal, not the law-abiding citizen. You're legislated out of your right to defend yourself. Incidentally, that RFID card that I had that never expired, Massachusetts changed their law. They all became expired. You had to file for new ones and jump through new hoops. To exercise a right you were born with, the simple right to be able to defend yourself, to be able to choose your life over that of a criminal.
You know,
See, I'm sorry. My take on the right to
Should
bear
be.
arms. Will you stop it? You're feisty today. My take on it is it's derived a little differently. I now have quite the collection of my own handguns that I like, and to distinguish them from my ex-husband's, mine have ribbons on them, so that he won't mess with mine. So that he has his and I have mine. But for me, it started, and I started to mention this before, and that's what happened last time I started to tell this story. So maybe I should take a hint. You want to take this call?
if you want to press a button, I'm afraid.
Hi, you're on the air. Or not.
No, wait, is he on? Are you on?
That's all right. He's gone now.
Oh, okay.
But sorry, wherever you are.
Finish your thought, hon.
Okay, my thought real quick is that with everything that's happening between Y2K and then 9/11 and even now as we're looking at the debt ceiling just crashing and China giving us threats and everybody thinks that things are going to happen with a big bomb or with something big happening in the city and the government when it could be something very small like China stopping our shipping lines and the grocery stores running empty. And what we're worried about the most is the mob mentality. I'm not worried about the government taking my arms. I'm worried about the mob mentality. When things stop running at the grocery store, when things stop running at the very local town level.
That's a real thing to be concerned with.
That's
Look what's
my
happening in
concern.
London right now, where these shops are getting broken into, they're being robbed, homes are being robbed, and the people there can't defend themselves. You have the ability to defend yourself. Your home might be the safer one versus your neighbor who doesn't have any way of defending themselves.
Absolutely.
So you keep your food, you keep your medicine, you keep your family going.
And and about the food, I already just was speaking to someone yesterday about this, and she said that she went to Costco and she saw that they had a big push on having food storage. And during Bush's administration, he also had a thing on food storage, have a year's supply of food. The Mormon Church has been pushing that for over 50 years. Have a year's supply of food for cases like what is happening now. When the housing market crashes, when the jobs are crashing, be prepared. Well, if this mob mentality hits, and you've got that year's supply of food at home, and your neighbors don't, and the rest of your town doesn't, guess where they're going to go?
Well, it's important then to make sure you've invested in precious metals, that being gold, steel, and lead.
But you need
Those are the precious metals you need.
All right. We
Right.
got another phone call
got a
from
caller. Hi, Norm. Welcome. Hi,
Norm?
You're on the air.
Hi, I want to call and tell you, this is Norm. I'm Norman Prince. What a great show you guys are having today. And I'm glad there are people out there that are fighting for the Second Amendment right, because it's going to become more and more that we need this, the right to protect our property. And I want to tell the lady, the gentleman there, and you two, keep on having a good show. You're worth watching. Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank
Norm.
You.
Yeah.
And it's not just in New Hampshire. It's not just here in New England.
It's not. And
It's
we have
everywhere
our
throughout the
theory in
country.
our household is to prepare for the worst but hope for the best.
Exactly.
And that holds well for anything. I mean, how many people went through the ice storm? We didn't have power for a long period of time. Our roads were flooded out during the flooding that happened. I couldn't get to work. My husband actually has a picture of me in my rescue gear standing in front of what used to be a road, calling work to tell them why I couldn't get there. And why I ended up staying down at the station, because that was the one place I could get to. There's all these things that can occur in life, and you should always consider yourself to be prepared for them, and that's the ability to defend yourself, the ability to feed your family, keep them warm, and to take care of them if they got injured. Those are just basic things that we should all consider, and it doesn't matter what the set of circumstances are, because the bottom line is preparedness is preparedness.
Don't you have a
Exactly.
picture there of you in your rescue gear?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Oh.
That's taken in front of the, I don't know if you can see it. That's taken in front of my fire station, the Andover EMS and the East Andover Fire Department, and the Andover Fire Department, who I'm very proud to volunteer and work with. And a friend of mine shot that picture of me with the flag, and we loved it so much we decided to make it the front cover of the book.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
We had had Fresh Air kids come to our house, And the first one, his name was Lorenzo Taylor, a really nice kid from Brooklyn. And one fall, I invited his father up so he could actually come up to it when the bugs aren't out there, because Lorenzo was scared to death of all these things flying through the air, and near the house. So anyway, so I got to talking to him about the 1-year mandatory they had in New York, and they probably still do. And he says it's a joke, because what happens is, if you're a law-abiding citizen, you go into the city and you have a pistol to defend your wife and the 2 kids, and somebody notices it or sees it, okay, you're going to lose you're going to go away for a year. You're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your house. Your wife might leave you. You lose pretty much everything. The coke dealer, okay, he's got an ounce of coke. He's got a pistol. He's looking at 20 years for the coke and a year mandatory for the pistol. He's going to plead down to 3, so they don't have to deal with it in court. It meant nothing.
Right.
So the one person that it's designed to try to prohibit from having a firearm is the one person that could care less, because he's got thousands of dollars worth of coke in his pocket he's got to protect. So it's a joke. It's politicians making themselves feel good or deliberately perverting the Constitution.
I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens at the federal level when we start seeing more of the truth come out in the gun runner incident that's all over the news.
Oh, yeah,
now.
the
Here is a
bad F
perfect
selling.
example. You have the government agency that's supposed to protect us from ourselves when it comes to firearms and ammunition and tobacco and whatever else they decide to throw under their flag, and they're the very ones that are selling
They're
firearms
recycling
to
them
people across the
back
Mexican
into-
border
yeah,
Absolutely.
that cost
System.
American lives.
Yep.
Yep, cost federal agent Terry his life, and it goes beyond too. There's a number of these. There's Castaway, allegedly to Honduras, and it just gets more and more information as it comes out in the committees, and supposedly now it's connected to the White House, and they're just trying to be as obstructionist as possible on releasing the information. But as it comes out, it's probably the single most incredible scandal of recent time. Yet mainstream media is not
No, they're
covering
not
it in
covering
any
it,
way
no.
that they should.
No.
And it's just outrageous. Roughly 2,000 guns allowed to go to Mexican drug cartels,
Yep. Yeah.
creating havoc.
It defies logic.
It
and common
is.
sense.
It is amazing to think that agency just should be disbanded. That's it. Ronald
Right.
Reagan almost did it. Should have done it.
No, that goes
Should've
back.
done it.
Yeah.
That goes back to I think one of the things that inflamed me so much. That was when I really started getting into politics. Was the Waco, Texas.
Oh.
They basically torched. I don't know how many.
Well, the whole
women
idea
and
there was
children.
to save the children, and they end up killing the children.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
That
was
worked.
Janet Reno, and
That was a mess.
It was horrible.
She
It was
didn't
horrible.
like that church, so there you go.
Well,
Into that.
yeah, and that whole idea. The thing is, if you watch what they do, they vilify somebody so that it's okay to kill them. Okay, they said he was raping children or had sex with underage people. Well, even if that's true, you arrest him when he was in town the day before.
Right. Well, I saw the actual search.
It's
The actual search warrants issue. The
Oh,
process.
really?
Yeah, I actually was able to see them. I was at a gun conference, and they actually had these. And one of the things they mentioned in there was that he had subversive literature, including Shotgun News. They actually wrote that in. Yeah, Shotgun News and Soldier of Fortune magazine.
Oh, that's horrible.
Hey, that
That's
was
it?
part of what they used to justify
Wow.
The
their
raid?
actions.
Really?
Having subversive literature.
And
Because-
that's not the
like
first
that.
or last time you've seen things like that.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, you
No.
remember what,
Ruby
not long
Ridge?
ago, when the
Oh,
MIAC
that was a
reports
horror.
came out. MIAC reports that came out of, what was it, Michigan, I think it was?
Oh, yeah, MIAC,
Where
absolutely
they came out
right.
with reports.
No, Missouri.
Was it Missouri?
Yeah, I think it was Missouri.
Telling law, and this was sent to law enforcement
Oh, yeah,
agencies.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I asked my my own sheriff, did you guys get this? And he said he asked, but he said he didn't disseminate it out to his officers. But here's a report sent to law enforcement across the country telling law enforcement officers, if you see vehicles that have the Constitution statement on them, or something about one-issue items like the Second Amendment,
Or don't tread on
freedom of
me.
speech, or don't tread on me, or a proud patriot, that somehow that makes you a target because you are a potential domestic terrorist.
Well, I am.
And this
That's-
is coming
just
out
ask
of
my
government
wife.
That
agencies.
phrase, a domestic
So I'm a
terrorist.
domestic,
love
so
that
I am an
one. That's
admitted
thrown around.
potential domestic terrorist simply because I believe in my God and I believe in my country.
Oh, wait, now
And
we're
I
talk-
advertise it on the back of my vehicle
Right.
in the form of...
Simply, you're a threat.
Apparently, my belief in God, my belief in being a patriot and defending our country and believing that everybody has the right to free speech, even if they say something I don't necessarily agree with, I'm going to protect that. But apparently doing that and putting it on proudly on the back of my vehicle makes me a target from my own government to look at me and say, well, you could be a criminal because...
Right.
Can
Add
I-
a
wait.
concealed carry permit on top of that, and they really want to look at you.
Can I, now, I want to talk about the real domestic terrorists of old.
Housewives?
No, not that bad. Jeez.
Paratroopers?
Could you read, because this is your forte.
I know.
This is Article 10 of the New Hampshire Constitution, which
called-
if you go online, the state website, you really should read our Constitution. If you want to hear some radical stuff, it's there. This is the 10th Amendment to the New Hampshire Constitution. I use this, I think my first term, then Representative Martha Fuller Clark had one of those anti-gun bills. If it melted at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, you couldn't have it, and all this just garbage Massachusetts crap.
Okay, Article 10.
But this is what I used to defend it, because everybody had already used the Second Amendment.
called the right of revolution. Government being instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the whole community, and not for the private interest or emolument, I can't speak tonight, of only one man, of any one man, family, or class of men. Therefore, whenever the ends of government are perverted and public liberty manifestly endangered, and all other means of redress are ineffectual, the people may, and of right ought to, reform the old or establish a new government. The doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd, slavish, and destructive of the good and happiness of mankind. Of that arbitrary power. That's.
Oh, come on, that has no application today.
Yeah,
No,
you
it's
think?
old.
No.
I have-
And who's to
That's
describe
obsolete.
exactly what
That's obsolete
arbitrary
stuff.
power
When we were
is?
fighting last year against the banning of firearms around the State House, that was something that was stated by one of the other representatives, and actually it was publicly on MUR-TV, was that, well, that was written 200 years ago when everybody wore guns. It's old,
It's
and we
old.
shouldn't follow it anymore.
No.
So, I mean,
Just-
if you
just
have that kind of
calm
a
down.
thought
The state
process,
will
well,
take
then
care
follow
of
that
you.
through. Apparently, the press really doesn't have freedom. The freedom to express oneself, the freedom to establish and practice your own religious faith really don't matter anymore because it was written so long ago.
See,
Yeah.
that's ridiculous thinking. What really has changed that much
Nothing.
since this has been
Because
written?
the important thing to remember is that when our founders were writing these things, they weren't writing it to say, here, this is what you're allowed to do, mankind. This is what you're allowed to do as a citizen. What they were saying was, government, you're not allowed to step on these things. You're
Right.
not allowed to step on these things because they are the rights that people were born with, instituted by their creator, not given to anyone by government. And unfortunately, people seem to twist oftentimes constitutional thought with saying that government is somehow giving you a right because it's in there. It's not what it is. It's to tie the hands of government, not man.
Well,
Right.
the one thing I like to point out when people use that argument that it's old, the Constitution is written to talk about people's character and the character of humankind. That power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That has not changed in thousands of years, much less 200.
And it's not going to change in the next.
So that's what this Constitution is
Yeah.
about, is to try to subject government to the people, because the Founding Fathers were well aware of what would happen if the government ended up with too much power, which is what they have in D.C. now.
But the thing I love about the Founding Fathers, and Gary and I get very excited whenever we get to talk about that, is they were so crystal clear. And how people mess it up today, when I go back and read their purpose and what they wrote and why they wrote it, and to me, it's just so crystal clear. And how people, when they take it out of context and twist it, and they say it's no longer applicable to today, I just don't understand that.
Imagine that there were 4 judges on our Supreme Court that couldn't understand that the Second Amendment protected an individual's right to bear arms.
I can't wrap
How
my head
could
around
that
that.
be?
I cannot wrap my head
4
around that.
judges couldn't get that. And there are judges, our Supreme Court, 4 of them. That-
It is,
that-
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
what's more scary than that is if they can't understand that simple concept, then what happens when they're faced with a case that has to do with the right of free speech,
Right.
that has to do with the freedom of expression of religion, or
Something
the right
more
to redress
complicated.
of government? What happens to the rest of your rights if you don't have the basic right to self-defense, the basic right to choose your life over that of somebody who would take it from you?
Yep.
And that's a scary thought, and that's something that should be sobering for a lot of people. We get a little jaded here in New Hampshire because we are luckier than most. Our laws in relation to the Second
no, we are
Amendment.
not. We fought for it
We
more
did,
than
but
most.
we
did,
won.
but we've had them for a lot longer than many other places. The freedom to exercise our Second Amendment right isn't nearly as trampled upon as it is in other
many other
states, and to
states.
the south in Massachusetts, where they're fighting constantly. So sometimes I think that we become a little bit jaded in that we don't realize always what all of those threats are and why we need to pay attention to what's going on to our neighbors and especially what's going on in D.C.
Well, if you
Agreed.
look, I think part of the problem is the media. If you look at that case, the 5-4 decision, National Propaganda Radio had the thing the next day, interviewing women in Washington, D.C., and saying, well, what do you think about, there was the D.C. case.
That was Heller.
Right. Saying about, allowing guns in Washington, D.C., and I'm sure they had to interview like 20 people to find one that would say what they wanted, but the one thing they'd say was, oh, I can't believe my babies are going to get killed. That was their response. Well, the reason people are getting killed in Washington, D.C. is only 25% are brought up in intact homes. It's got nothing to do with guns. Guns are irrelevant.
It's more that it's an inner city. It's
So,
yeah.
Well, and that's where you do see, when
But-
you mention the city, the more urban an area,
The more
there's a
densely
more gun-
populated.
Right, more gun control.
Right.
And you can see that the worst gun control states have large population centers, and the reverse is true for less. So you do have exactly that. You have an urban versus rural, suburban mentality, and that ethic that's out there is very controlling politically.
yep.
And so it's a constant battle.
And you can't gun control by town and by state.
Right.
And if we could, as unpolitically correct as that is, that would be a lot more effective, frankly, because gun control is more needed in a city than it is out in the middle of the country.
I would disagree with you.
You
I
would
don't think that
disagree with
any
that?
level of gun control is going to be beneficial because all you're doing is creating laws that affect law-abiding citizens. It doesn't change the criminal element of the surroundings. The more restrictive the gun laws are, the more criminals have guns and law-abiding citizens don't. So you're going to have higher why do we have
Because
less
it's just
incident-
always going to be easier for the criminal to
Yeah,
get the gun.
Well,
is that what you're
exactly
saying?
right.
Okay.
But because they're not affected by a law. They're not going. Think of it this way.
Yeah,
all
they're not
the-
going to stop and wait in line to get their permit.
Every
Every
ti-
where do you
everywhere
need a
we've
gun
seen-
more to protect yourself? In New
Well,
Hampshire
everywhere-
or Washington, D.C.?
That's true.
Look, everywhere that
DC.
we've
So, right,
seen-
so that's
DC.
why it really is.
No, you're
it's
right,
backwards.
you're right.
Let me
Yeah.
put this out there for you. Everywhere that we've seen a mass massacre of innocent lives, whether it's Virginia Tech, whether it's Luby's Cafe in Texas, pick your poison. They all had the same thing in common. They were all quote-unquote gun-free zones, signs, no guns here. When a criminal walks up to the door and sees no guns here, he doesn't turn around and walk
Yeah.
away. He says, hoo-hoo, nobody can defend themselves.
That's true.
I can pull off mass mayhem here.
We call them
And
victim
that's
disarmament zones.
It's
Great.
Victim disarmament zones.
Great.
we call them killing zones in the Second Amendment sisters, and we've been pushing trying very hard to prevent that from
Oh, could
occurring.
you tell us a little bit about the Second Amendment
Yes, I've
Sisters?
not heard that before.
The
Please
Second
do.
Amendment Sisters is a women's rights organization that was established years ago. Back around 1999, there was a group of women who decided to march on Washington, D.C., the Million Mommers. And they wanted to say that the American woman wanted more gun control. Well, there was a group of women out there that said, we absolutely do not want these women representing all American women. We want people to know that there are American women out there that absolutely want to protect and defend their Second Amendment rights, that believe that the basic human right to self-defense is just that, a basic human right. So they started an organization called the Second Amendment Sisters, and they founded it and established it and started it on the Mall in D.C. in direct
Response
to what was going on the other side.
Sure.
And I'm sure there's a lot of press coverage.
Well, there was some press coverage. I've seen we've grown in leaps and bounds. I can't even begin to tell you what our membership is. We have members across the country in every state. We've even got some members in Canada, where Canada is highly restricted.
Well, you're about to have another member in Colorado.
One of our spokeswomen is actually Dr. Susanna Hupp, which, for those who don't know, she was a chiropractor who lived in Texas, and she had gone out to lunch one afternoon with her mom and dad, and to Luby's Cafe. And they're just sitting there having a wonderful lunch together when a man who was absolutely insane drove his truck into the restaurant, literally driving over people as that occurred, and then got out of his truck and began systematically killing, assassinating one person after another, just literally walking around, pop,
Wow.
pop. Susanna's gun was in her truck. Why? Because the legislature, in their wisdom, had said that it's safer if you leave your firearm in your vehicle and don't bring it into an establishment. And that was the law, and her, being a law-abiding citizen, left her
Just
firearm
that.
in her truck. She had no way to defend herself or her parents. There was, at one point, somebody broke out a window, and people were trying to make this mad dash run for the window. Her dad, actually being the man that he was, tried to stop the madman. And when he went and lunged for the madman turned around and shot him. She grabbed her mother by the shirt and tried to run for that window with her mom. Her mom slipped out of her hands, and when she turned to look, her mom was actually on the floor cradling her father in her arms. The police later stated that they saw the gunman walk over to where her mom was cradling her dad, and her mom looked up at the man, and she looked back down at her husband, and the man shot her at point-blank range in the head.
Wow.
When Susanna testified in front of Congress, she wasn't necessarily treated very well. Here is a chiropractor. She wasn't an advocate at the time. She was simply somebody who went out to have dinner with her mom and dad and left an orphan. And one of the things that was poignant to me was in her speech, as scary as that was to be there testifying in front of all of these people, he said, this isn't about hunting. The Second Amendment isn't about hunting. It's about protecting all of us from all of you. And I was legislated out of my right to defend my family. I don't blame the madman. He was crazy. I blame the legislature.
Yep.
And she was right to say that.
I would agree.
And it's something that
Charles
is poignant
Schumer
to me.
was majorly disrespectful to her when she was testifying to that.
There was a lot of people
He
that
was
were
congressman then,
disrespectful.
now
But
he's
here's
senator.
a woman that just lost her parents, that her children never got to know their grandparents because of the actions of this madman and the legislature refusing to allow her to defend herself.
Do you know that one of the other aspects on the Second Amendment is that also knives are covered? And in the decisions, knives have been mentioned. Do you know that New Hampshire is the freest knife place on earth? The freest. And the reason for that is because of Jen Coffey.
I know, she's crazy.
The freest. Got rid of all the knife laws and then helped get preemption as well.
Can I-
So it is fantastic.
I had a quick question for
And we're
you.
running out of time.
I know, running out of
We're
time.
running out of
I
time.
want to. I guess I'll ask you later. It's too long because I really have a question for Jen and Elizabeth. As women, if you're carrying, does your pistol have to match your outlet?
Oh, here we go. With the raspberry gun. And I packed my shoes. I didn't bring my shoes. Did you bring it? I want
as
this.
you can see, this is unloaded. There's no bullets in this, so it's more than a paperweight. I think this matches my shirt well.
Is this the shirt from the picture?
Yeah.
Do you
yeah.
have
really
one of those
doesn't.
European
It does.
shoulder bags, perhaps, that might work for you?
The man
You know,
bag?
the
I believe
man
there's a
bag.
Man
Seinfeld
bag?
episode
That might
with that.
actually work for you. And to answer your question, it depends on what I'm wearing as to what I decide to carry. Because for women, and this
Yeah.
is let me tell you, one of the greatest things about the
But
Second
do you
Amendment.
think guys should be able to match their outfits with their firearms too?
If that's what
If
makes
you're
you
secure in your
comfortable and you're
manlyhood,
secure,
Gary,
I'm
absolutely.
glad
You
you
go
belong
for
with
it.
pink
Absolutely.
pistols. That's good. Very good.
But you know, in all seriousness, though, one of the things that comes up with the Second Amendment sisters, we have women's only shoots, and that's one of the topics. And usually on Mother's Day, we tend to have a nice little fashion show to talk about. How do you carry when you're wearing a skirt? How do you carry when you're wearing a?
I like the
something that
Laura
doesn't have
Croft method myself, you know?
yes.
No, anyway, we're running out of time, and I want to thank you both so much for joining us tonight.
It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
Next week, we got Representative Ross Terrio is coming to talk. I wanted to talk to a freshman, and maybe at least another one, I haven't found out who yet, legislator, about what it's like to be a freshman legislature. Jen's been through it, you know what it's like. It's kind of daunting at first, and after a while you get your feet wet. It's pretty awesome. You would not believe how unbelievably blessed you are in New Hampshire to have a volunteer legislature. Absolutely blessed. People like Jen and I wouldn't be in there.
No,
Because it
I'm a
would-
full-time EMT. I work full-time.
Your time
You
is
don't-
precious.
Absolutely,
You can't.
and I volunteer my time to help represent my constituents. Yeah, you're right. We are blessed because you get a bunch of normal people getting together up there.
Well, I
having
don't know
normal-
about normal.
Well, okay, the
Let's
majority
not
of
push
people,
the envelope.
minus the paratroopers.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people that are normal, average, everyday American citizens. You know, middle
you know,
class,
that's what we
blue
want in our
collar,
government.
white collar, what have you. Mixing and mingling and trying to create good laws and trying to get rid of some bad ones.
Yeah. And then, let's see, the week after that, the 24th, we've got
Bullying.
Dr. Malcolm Smith is going to come in and talk about bullying. And
Which I'm going to miss.
you're going to miss, but you can watch it online, hon.
Yes, I'd like to say goodbye.
Oh, yes, say
That
goodbye.
would be all right.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I have some bad news. I just found out that I'm moving, and so this will be my last show. And I want to say thank you to everyone here, and as always, thank you to Cheryl and her family, because if it were not for Cheryl, we wouldn't be doing this. And I will miss all of you, but I will watch the show from Colorado, where the girls and I will be living in the Springs.
So I guess we're all set. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. You are the best co-host I've ever had.
I get to come back and visit, you know. I'm the only co-host you ever had.
Yeah.
The blonde. It took me a minute. It took me a minute.
That's not fair.
Oh, I know. I'm a rotten person.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know,
we
but
love
we
you,
like
though.
you anyway.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Well, good night, everybody. Carry on. All right.
You're the best.
You're the best.
All right. Are we done? No. Yes, maybe. Have a good night, folks.
Have a good night.
Good night.